When we last left the Claib Jones autobiography, the fight at Fort Bates in Knott County, Kentucky, the first shootout between the Jones and Hall factions had taken place. Talt Hall was wounded in the shoulder. During the night, the men had escaped the fort and went to Floyd County and killed Constable Abner Little. They shortly returned to Fort Wright and held their headquarters there. Claib Jones was appointed as a special bailiff to arrest Hall and his men. These men had a $500 reward for each of their arrests. This is a retelling of how the Siege of Fort Wright went according to Jones. In our Feud series, we will look at this siege as it was talked about in the newspaper articles of the time. According to those newspapers, this went on for several weeks, and there was a lot of shooting that took place. However, Claib does not mention a time frame to these events. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this help us to fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. John Wright sends a message. The news of the shootout did not sit very well with John Wright. Since Talt Hall was a friend and under his protection in Letcher County, he would do all he could to protect him. So, he sent a message to Claib Jones stating that the good citizens of Letcher County would shoot and kill Jones and his men on sight. So, to test this out to see if it was true, Jones went to Letcher County. He found that this was not true at all of the people there, and they were friends to the law and order, and were friendly to Jones and his men. There did not seem to be any hostility in the area whatsoever toward anyone who was coming to arrest Hall and his men. During this time, it was discovered that Talt Hall had left his men behind and traveled to Virginia. After this video, please see our video on Talt Hall for his version of events on how he escaped and went to Virginia and ended up in jail for the murder of Police Chief Enos Hilton. Trips to the fort. Jones and his men made several trips back and forth to Fort Wright. However, they never found anyone there or guarding the fort. They made several raids on the fort, resting a while and then going back to do another raid. Precautions were taken each time Jones, Vance, and his men got within 12 miles of the fort. The men would take 2 days to travel to the fort, each time being sure to travel only during the night and resting during the day. When they would come to a road, they would lay stones across the road to walk upon, with the last man taking up the stones as he went, throwing them to the side of the road so that no sign would ever be left to the crossings. When they came to Elkhorn Creek, they traveled 5 miles by the waterway, and when they reached near the fort, they would climb up a rocky branch and came around the hillside to as close to the fort as they could without being discovered. Shootout at Fort Wright. After breakfast, a woman was spotted riding up and down the road, looking for signs of a possible invasion. She would go up each road and dismount, look around, mount her horse, and ride in the other direction, dismount, and return to the house after a few minutes. Upon her return, several men ran out of the fort carrying their guns. Jones ordered the surrender. The gunfight then began. Wright and his men ran a running fight all the way to the Cumberland Mountain. Wright had a breech-loading gun and peppered buckshots all around Jones and his men. While the running fight was going on, Nell Bates, Hall's sister, was at the fort and screaming, quote, "Oh, Claib Jones is back and trying to kill my people," unquote. After Wright had made his escape, his wife fixed Jones and his men breakfast when they returned to the fort. She was of friendly conversation and always spoke the truth. 5 or 6 of Wright's other women came to the fort to see if anyone had been killed or wounded, and looked on Jones and his men as if they were the devil incarnate. After searching the fort, Jones and his men went on to the second story of the building and found Miles Bates and Blackhawk Sizemore and Bill D. Hall, who was the brother of Talt Hall. Jones and his men took these prisoners and headed toward Prestonsburg with them. Trouble with Draughon. On the way to Prestonsburg, the men stopped for the night in Hyman, Kentucky. Deputy Dolph Draughon had made a posse of men on his own and had made a raid on Fort Wright. This was not successful, and upon their return trip, Draughon and his men were waylaid in an ambush by Wright and his men, and a gunfight ensued. One of Draughon's men had been killed, and the horse that Draughon was riding on was shot out from under him. Draughon was mad about this and wanted to kill the prisoners of Jones for revenge. Jones refused to allow this to happen. Jones told Draughon that if he wanted to kill men, then he needed to go capture his own to do it with. Draughon gave orders for his men to line up to shoot the prisoners. Jones and his men got in front of the prisoners and drew their guns. Draughon saw that it was going to be a fight and withdrew his men and left. Thus, on this trip, Fort Wright was broken up and John Wright and his men fled to Virginia. Prestonsburg Jail. The next day the party made it to Prestonsburg and the prisoners were put into jail. The jailer, Jim Lane, was afraid that Wright would come and do the jailbreak, releasing the prisoners. Jones went to the court and got permission to have an extra man guard the prisoners. Cicero Cox was chosen by Jones as the guard. There was a large reward offered for Talt Hall, George Johnson, and others, but there was no reward for John Wright. After some time, John Wright brought in all the other men from the Talt Hall gang, except for Talt Hall, Wash Craft, and George Johnson. Craft had left the area. George Johnson was found shot to death in the woods by someone he considered to be a friend. John Wright got the reward for all of the men that he turned in. The only man wounded at Fort Wright was Bill Bates, who was shot in the back with a Winchester bullet that had went through a fence post first and then embedded itself under his skin. Special thank you. We wish to once again thank those who have helped us to gather information about the people in this series. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living could not do the amount of research and storytelling that we do without the help of some great historians and friends. We have a special list today of people that we wish to thank. A special thank you goes out to Anthony Blair and Vicki McPeak Sackett. Another very special thank you goes to Charlotte Hicks Cottle for her help in the Jones family. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.